Welcome to Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously. I'm Chris Baker.
And I'm Tom Flynn. Today we're bringing you episode 17, Help a Brother Out. Still not sure about that title. Wherein we cover a one-off Aurora and Northstar adventure and check in with Shaman as he makes a guest appearance in Iron Man, of all places. Kind of couldn't imagine a weirder fit for a Canadian mystic than in a book centered on a techno-futurist capitalist, but it's great. I mean, is that weird?
A little bit.
We haven't exactly seen Shaman blowing up mining rigs or making oil execs stare into his sack. Just saying, maybe he should hang out with Northstar and his friends a bit more.
Yeah, listeners, you probably couldn't see, but Tom and I both looked very deeply into our cameras during that pregnant pause. So to remind you of the important parts of the story so far.
Last issue, we wrapped up Aurora, a.k.a. Jean-Marie, but not like a normal a.k.a. Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. And secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langowski, a.k.a. Sasquatch, unhaunting his family's mansion so Alpha Flight can use it as a base.
Sasquatch is concerned that he has been losing himself to the beast lately, and Aurora struggles with her split personality with Jean-Marie, but has been showing signs of being neither and both at the same time. Heather Hudson is putting the tragedy of her husband and team founder James MacDonald Hudson's death behind her and finding her footing on the next phase of her life.
We're just going to pause right here for the pipes to come in for good old Mac. Shaman, a.k.a. Dr. Michael Two Young Men. Is that the right way of putting it? Shouldn't it be Dr. Michael Two Young Men, a.k.a. Shaman? Or I guess he really is more Shaman than Two Young Men at this point. Anyway, he's helping his estranged daughter Elizabeth, a.k.a. Talisman, adjust to her newly discovered magical abilities and responsibilities.
That's all you need to know for now, and if you want better context, I recommend listening to episodes 1 through 16 of Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, and you'll be fully up to speed. And with that, Alpha Flight number 22, cover date May 1985, titled Rub Out, and we get some fun credits in the box this time. I wonder when we will read our last fun credit box from Marvel and not even realize it.
Probably January 20th, when all the joy is fully sucked out of our lives.
You know, I remember 8 years ago, I made a note in my journal at the time that it was the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Sheer Terror.
Yeah. Little did you know that not 4 years later, January 6th would be a completely different form of terror. But, you know.
Yeah, we'll see how much of this stuff stays. Because I don't know how much I want to get into that on the show. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, we'll
I'm not because I don't want to offend anybody, just because this is my safe space, Tom.
Yeah. And that's staying in.
So back to the fun credits box. Written and drawn dramatically by John Byrne. Embellished enthusiastically by Bob Wyacek, colored prismatically by Andy Yankus, lettered alphabetically by Rick Parker, edited diplomatically by Dennis O'Neill, observed enigmatically by Jim Shooter. And I could tell that Rick Parker lettered this page just by the title words on page 1. They're big, round, rubber, inflated-looking letters, and I am officially in the Rick Parker fan club.
The cover has Northstar and Aurora losing a fight to an enormously fat woman in an equally enormous pink dress. Caption boxes say, "Meet Pink Pearl. Such a nice lady."
This is probably one of the more memorable Alpha Flight covers, even if it isn't great.
It's the pink. Number 12 was predominantly pink as well.
Huh. Yeah, well, I guess that's the key to an iconic Alpha Flight cover. Make it pink. Who knew? The issue opens to a very bikini-clad Aurora stumbling in from the snow to a very surprised Northstar.
And a very surprised us. We last saw Northstar laying around a young man in very small swim trunks poolside somewhere warm.
Dude can fly faster than sound. He can be anywhere he wants to be.
So you're saying he gets around?
Okay, that level of joke is exactly how John Byrne would have played it, so bravo, Tom.
Before the onset of hypothermia, she seems to be struggling to think straight. We last saw Aurora with Walt on the cigarette boat coming home from Tamarind Island in British Columbia.
Her confused thinking set in as Walt tried to join the Sea Level Club. She freaked out, flew off, then kept flying off eastward toward Quebec for 3 days. At full speed, she could make that trip in well under 3 minutes. So she's flying for 3 days in a fugue state, wearing a string bikini before showing up at her estranged brother's house.
Northstar and his friends help warm Aurora up and get her put to bed. He briefly considers contacting Alpha Flight and Langowski before deciding once again to try to isolate his sister from her friends because, well, he's just not very good at sharing.
Quick art note here. And I hate to say it, but look, we haven't mentioned it for a while, but here in these pages, both twins have distinctly elfin ears again. So just keep in mind, since you can't see it, they got pointy ears, and this is the slowest burn, low payoff comics event this side of the 12 in X-Men. Did you ever read the 12, Tom?
Oh, absolutely not.
Oh, God, it was...
You told me about it, and that was more than enough. Scene change to Vancouver, where we find Heather and Elizabeth in Vancouver as part of Alpha Flight's relocation to the West Coast. They are desperately trying to find Aurora as Walt is losing his composure over her disappearance. They also discuss how Walt is losing control of his Sasquatch form.
Look, Byrne keeps telling us that Walt is losing control of his Sasquatch form, but we don't really see it that often on page. Like, even in the last arc where he Sasquatched out, rampaged through and took care of Gilded Lily, like, we didn't really see a whole lot of that. There's a little bit, but this is definitely Byrne telling us instead of showing us. So, suddenly, Heather sees out of the corner of her eye her dead husband Mac walking among the crowd. She screams out and tries to run to him, but he turns away and melts into said crowd. And as a reader, it sure looks like Mac all right, doesn't it?
It seems like this guy is in more issues of Alpha Flight after he dies than he was in before he died.
So this mystery of who that was will be resolved in the final John Byrne story arc that is now on the horizon, Tom. We're like 6 issues out from He Who Shall Not Be Named taking over.
Before we move on, I just want to comment that, like, Mac melting into the crowd is way better than how he disappeared before her eyes the last time she saw him.
Boo!
Back to Northstar. As part of taking care of his mentally unstable sister, he decides to take her to the circus. Or at least to circus people, who he knows from his youth. So recall that we don't know much about what happened to Northstar before he became a ski champion, so his youth is wide open to be filled in.
So there is one bit of his youth that the alert listener might recall, but we'll bring it up shortly to go with the narrative flow.
Northstar's friend Clementine de Arbonville greets his arrival to her circus with a full-on kiss on the mouth, surprising Northstar and his sister. Clementine is in turn surprised about the existence of a sister. A quick note on Clementine's name. The song Lady de Arbonville was written by Cat Stevens about Patty de Arbonville, who he was with at the time. She was part of the Warhol set. He wrote the song after she took off to New York for a little bit. Apparently there's a quote of her commenting on how, like, depressed he seemed to be about missing her, and she was a little surprised. I don't know. She did later marry Don Johnson. I don't know what to tell you. Like, there's just so much happening in I don't know. What we do know is that John Byrne almost certainly had a extensive record collection and clearly liked to take inspiration for character names or appearances from the songs that he liked.
Chris Claremont actually wrote in a real-world band into X-Men comic books. So it's a band called Cats Laughing that was written in, and so they exist in the 616 proper. So... these artsy-fartsy types, they all run to the set. You know how they are, Tom.
I do. I really, really do.
Back to Aurora and Clementine and Northstar. With everyone being surprised about, oh, you have a sister. Oh, there's a girl kissing you. Like, I feel like every time the twins meet somebody from the other one's life, that's how the introduction goes. Like, oh, I didn't know you had a brother. Yeah. So I bet they get that a lot. It's just like... what they do.
We say that a lot about the twins. It's just what they do. Clementine called Northstar for help because her circus is in trouble. Work is good, but the workers keep changing. Okay, look, it's a fucking circus. This is not a place
That's
known...
a phrase for a reason. It's a circus.
It's not known for like a stable workforce. So, okay, moving on. Moving on from that particular point, work is good, but the workers keep changing. Okay. No, actually, I can't move on. Work is good. It's a fucking circus. The workers are supposed to change, and the work is always like barely hanging on by a thread. It's why they move around all the time. Okay.
Well, no, she's talking about the featured performers. That the fat lady gets changed, and the human skeleton gets changed, and the bearded lady gets changed, and these like those are positions that don't move around much, because when you're the fat lady or you're the bearded lady, there's not a job board for bearded lady. You know, like once you get in a circus, that's where you stay. So those tentpole performers are the ones who are being changed out here. Oh, did you like that? That's a circus pun, Tom.
Yeah, I was going to say R.I.P. Craigslist, because I'm quite certain there was a job board for bearded ladies on Craigslist.
Pour one out for Craigslist.
Indeed. To be specific, ever since she hired Pink Pearl, her friends in the circus have been having accidents, and Pearl always has a replacement to recommend. Clementine's been so busy running the show, she didn't realize everyone around her worked for Pearl while she just signed the checks.
So at this moment, Pearl enters the scene, sucker punches Clementine, and she always refers to herself in the third person. And she tells us her name is Pearl Gross, which, we'll talk about that. But, Tom, one thing about Pearl. So she looks like, how do I say this politely? Her face looks like a thumb that sticks out from the bulk that is apparently her shoulders, and she's got these evil little eyes and a little cupid mouth lipsticked onto a much larger mouth, and she looks like Ranak from that adventure back in time with Stang, you remember, except without the teeth. You know, she's got like those evil eyes and that weird mouth.
Yeah.
And the amorphous shape.
Yeah.
She looks like if Ranak and Mojo from the X-Men had a baby, and it was really fat.
We are moving on from this as fast as possible. Northstar is subdued by the creepy skeleton man twisting all around him, while Aurora is subdued by Pearl shoving Aurora's face into Pearl's fat stomach until she passes out. So yeah, Pearl is a bit problematic. I mean, the fact that her name's Pearl Gross... Her presentation, she also looks a little bit, more than a little bit, like the Blob. But the Blob looks like he does because of his mutation. She is just a very large woman drawn to look grotesque. And it feels a little much, you know? Like everything about it feels like a little fat shamey, a little over the top.
You know, funny story, this is not the only appearance that Pearl will make. She will pop up in a couple other things later, but not as a villain like this. One last interlude before we find out Pearl's deal.
We cut to the totally real place of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, which seems lovely, where former Beta, Gamma, and Omega Flight, respectively, members Roger Box, Madison Jeffries, and the Box with an X armor are working on Roger's plan to murder the shit out of Delphine Courtney, the Roxxon Corporation's standard-issue sex bot who murdered James McDonald Hudson. Specifically, genius mechanic Roger and blue-collar mutant Jeffries are testing out the new and improved armor system that combined Roger's designs with Jeffries' ability to transmute technology to whatever he can imagine.
I described them before as like when the MCU, Bruce Banner and Tony Stark go all science bros and end up creating a murderous AI. These guys go do an engineering bros montage where Roger actually explains physics in a way that Jeffries can understand and blows his mind. And working out of his home, I'm sure that Roger's manufacturing ability was extremely limited. Remember that Roger is a chubby red-haired man with legs that end at the knees. So he is confined to a wheelchair and is limited in how much he can do from his own home in terms of high-end alloys and things like that. So with Madison at his side, he can just take scrap and turn it into what he needs at the cost of just feeding Madison. And I almost wonder if Box could go full supervillain and just, like, keep Madison around for when he needs shit, you know?
This armor is everything Roger ever dreamed up, but knew he could never actually manufacture.
So this is a totally new armor from the one that we saw beat JMH to death.
Almost beat him to death.
Okay, look, you corrected me on this before, and I want to defend myself here. Yes, JMH died when his power source exploded, and he couldn't stop it. But Tom, riddle me this. Why was the power source going to explode?
Because he had to manipulate his own suit to fight off Box.
So what you're saying is the box armor beat Guardian so badly that his power pack exploded and killed him? Because that sounds to me like beating to death, but with extra steps.
I'm just saying that if that's the way you want to go, one of those steps would also encompass Heather's involvement. So if you want to make her accessory, that's your call.
Oh, he wasn't beaten to death. He was distracted to death by his wife. There are worse ways to go as a husband.
Indeed.
So to mark this enormous change in the box armor, Roger makes it look exactly the same, but paints it red. Oh, and instead of controlling it with a VR headset, Roger now physically fuses with the armor, and it becomes his body.
Yeah, no biggie.
Yeah.
No serious change there.
Yeah, 2 panels of explanation on that. That's exactly what we need. Look, this dynamic is never explained. Roger is not a mutant. This isn't his power. And since Roger does it, it isn't Jeffrey's power that lets him do it. It's something Jeffries and Roger built into the technology of the armor itself.
Roger says, the concept of a physical fusion with my living metal alloy hadn't even occurred to me. It's just amazing. And Jeffrey said this was done specifically to keep anyone from taking over the armor again.
Oh, Tom, that was great. I love it. I wish this was either made clear that it was a function of the armor itself and a bit of how it worked. Box is the only one who's going to wear this armor until he's gone, and then Jeffries will wear it. So maybe Jeffries can change the security user in there or something like that. Well, I don't know.
You kind of got Jeffries as a bit of a Deus Ex here, right?
He's a blank slate, yeah.
But he's also what's allowing these modifications to happen, and for whatever is going to happen with Box in the future, which you know about, I don't. So I feel like, yeah, it's a little annoying. You know what? I think we're finding this especially annoying because all the other powers for Alpha Flight and the folks we've dealt with are pretty well grounded and explained. You've got mutants, you've got a Hulk experiment, you've got a powered suit, you've got all these things going on. And in the case of the person who doesn't have superpowers in the team, Puck, you know that he's lived a long life of training his body like crazy into some sort of weapon. And then this just sort of feels like, oh, and this happens now. And that's just, it's not satisfying in the same way, you know?
Yeah, it's not that same concrete, this is what they do, and it doesn't really matter because we're not here for the cool tricks of the powers. We're here for the train wreck of the soap opera of these characters.
The panels in which Box emerges from, demerges or whatever from the armor is actually pretty cool looking, as his body starts to materialize out of it and slowly moves away, and then he's back in his wheelchair. And I almost feel like Byrne had that image and that sequence in his head and worked backwards from that to get to that point.
Yeah, and just gave us that one sentence from Box about it.
To justify it. And that's just, again, it doesn't feel super... It's fine. In the grand scheme, it's not that big of a deal. It's just not terribly satisfying for us.
And as a security function, it works because Box and Jeffries are the only ones who are ever going to inhabit the Box armor. It's not taken over, except for the Technomancer. Thank you, letter writer from a couple of episodes ago. But Jeffries is going to spend more issues in the Box armor than Roger will. And he will use the Box armor because if he can transmutate metal and whatnot, once he's fused into the metal, he's essentially a metallic shapeshifter and can make it at one point in time, Jeffries in the Box armor becomes a spaceship. And he's the captain's chair and his head is there and Heather's sitting on the captain's chair.
I've seen that movie. I will say, and I don't know, I like Roger fine so far.
Yeah, I like him so far. He's a little focused on the murder business.
Well, who hasn't? But I am looking forward to when it's just Box BOX and not Box BOCHS2, because
it's hard in an auditory medium.
As a person reading this script, it annoys the shit out of me to keep coming across that, but that's just me.
I like this Jeffries as well, that while Roger seems like a fairly nice fellow, even if he's into this murdering stuff, Jeffries, you get the impression that he's a guy who hasn't had a lot of formal education, but he's learned a lot along the way in terms of hard knocks. That's the impression I've gotten from his little bits here. And I like that he's a gruff working man, and he's not in over his head, but he's definitely a fish out of water. He's not opposed to the craziness around him, but just looking to make some money, and he doesn't want to be a bad guy necessarily. So he found the one guy in the world that can make the murder revenge business pay, and that you don't technically count as a dick. So all this character work will be undone soon on both counts, so enjoy it while you got it.
They drive off in Roger's fancy battle Winnebago. I disagree. Every Winnebago is fancy, and every Winnebago is ready for battle.
You know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of that, like, fancy battle Winnebago from Stripes with Bill Murray.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
That's what it looked like with the double wheels in the back. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Anyway, they drive off in their bitchin' wagon in search of some righteous murdering.
Okay. All right. To be fair, I don't think you can have the cops arrest a robot for murder.
What if that robot was an active participant in one of the steps that led to a death?
I don't know. Things get wild in the 616. There's a whole old school blog about this called Law in the Multiverse, where lawyers talk about stuff like this and like whether you can be arrested for crimes committed before you died and were resurrected. It's good stuff.
Meanwhile, back in the circus, Pearl villain-splains her master plan to Aurora, Northstar, and Clementine.
Pearl has been hired to disrupt a super-secret meeting between Canada and the United States about creating an anti-missile laser defense system. That meeting is happening a mere 3 miles from where the circus is currently set up.
Quick note, the Canadian PM, by the way, is not Pierre Trudeau.
Oh, no, we gotta say his whole name.
Go for it.
No, I don't know it off the top of my head. It's like 8 names. Let me pull it up from like the first script. You know, in the earlier episodes, I probably would have been able to flow it off my mouth, but
I know. I actually wrote it as Pierre Trudeau just to see if it's just hardwired, if it's like gray matter stuff.
Fuck beans. We've archived that stuff, and I off the top of my head, I forgot where I put it. Season 1 files, maybe? No, that's not.
I got it.
Yay! Because I'm fucked.
Oh, I just went to Wikipedia.
Oh yeah, that's where I got it from initially.
Okay, just to make Chris happy, Joseph Philippe Pierre Yves Elliott Trudeau. You happy now?
Very. Thank you.
That is not the Canadian Prime Minister. If we're keeping this vaguely synced with reality, Brian Mulroney was the PM at the time. He won an election over John Turner, who succeeded Trudeau after old Pierre resigned as PM. When Turner took office, he advised that Parliament be dissolved and new elections take place, which he lost. Turner was Prime Minister for exactly 79 days, which makes him the second shortest serving Prime Minister of Canada. Mulroney served for almost 10 years, during which time he signed off on the Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement, a precursor to NAFTA. So, by the math Chris deployed above, Brian Mulroney is culpable for the rise of the Sinaloa cartel. Also, when Trudeau resigned, he went home to his then partner, Margot Kidder.
What?
I think we should all sit in silence for a moment and give Chris like a second or two to process all of that information.
There was a lot that just happened there, Tom. Oh, wow. Okay.
And by my count, that's at least 2 failures, a team up, and some sex. So maybe finish your drink.
Well, yeah, my brain's a noodle. So, Pink Pearl's going to set off a nuke or something. It's a bomb. It's a fancy bomb. It's special, she says, but they don't exactly say what it is. She's going to set it off and then let all the blame fall on Clementine, because clearly when a bomb goes off, you blame the nearby circus proprietor. Clearly, right?
Carnies.
Can't trust them. Small hands always smell like cabbage. So, dear listeners, the blame is going to fall on Clementine because Clementine and Northstar used to be separatistes. Did I say it right, Tom?
Ish.
Separatists.
It's also not entirely. We'll get into that in a moment.
Okay, well, they were violent Quebec nationalists who fought to remove Quebec from Canada to prevent it from being appropriated into greater Canadian culture.
So this is the part where we kind of turn into a little bit of a Canadian history podcast. We've alluded to this in the past, and I think it's somewhat general knowledge, that there is a tension between Quebec and the rest of Canada, or at least there's a very strong separatist sentiment within Quebec. There's also a lot of like movement between sovereigntists versus separatists, because separatist has such a negative connotation to it. But from the 60s into the early 70s into really 1970, there were a number of organizations that popped up arguing for Quebecois sovereignty. a lot of those organizations went violent. And there's one in particular, the Front de Libération de Quebec, that would probably be the one that Northstar is most closely associated with if he was actually like planting bombs and whatnot. They were a Marxist-Leninist organization, but organization is kind of a weird word. They operated more in a cell structure, and it was almost like they moved in waves, where one cell would take a certain action, then another cell would go active kind of on its own or inspired by the previous one, but they often got a little bit more violent and a little bit more violent. At one point, support for the FLQ was incredibly high, but that waned after they kidnapped and murdered the provincial labor minister, Pierre Laporte, in 1970.
You know, kidnapping and murdering generally drops support for your cause. Just letting you all know, folks.
From what I read up on, they specifically went after Laporte because he had ties to a mafia family operating out of Quebec, and they wanted him to confess in order to... Basically, they kidnapped him in order to force him to confess to his own corruption, thereby implicating the rest of the government and advance the cause, because part of the argument was that the federal government was corrupt and therefore Quebec should manage itself. And it's a lot more complicated than that. But
everyone knows the best confessions come at gunpoint after you've been kidnapped. Those are when you find out the real truth from people.
And gotta say, he didn't die great. He was tied up and chained up, and he heard a siren in the distance after a few days of captivity and threw himself out the window shouting for help, which no one heard, but he did manage to sever multiple arteries. And as he was slowly bleeding to death, his kidnappers decided that it would be better to strangle him and kill him than take him to a hospital. So it wasn't just that they kidnapped and murdered the dude. A lot of other things happened that I think made people pretty horrified by the circumstances.
You know, I really appreciate the context that you have brought to this, because on the page, Pink Pearl says that Clementine and Northstar were running around blowing up mailboxes. And it makes them sound like, you know, charged up kids. And what you're describing is a wildly different, exponentially larger set of violence here.
The thing is, they very well could have been blowing up mailboxes. Like, their cell may have just simply been doing, like, you know, civil disturbances versus kidnapping, torture, murder, what have you.
You know what? Headcanon now is that Northstar was part of the group that kidnapped that labor minister and was part of strangling him.
Well, no, I don't think we need to go
when he was like 11 or something.
Well, but that's the other thing, is that timeline-wise, I mean, Northstar and Aurora are like in their 20s. So, I mean, I would say it's more likely that Northstar was a runner for the group, like a lookout of sorts at that time.
He would have been a fantastic runner for the group. He would have
been a perfect lookout, right? Especially once puberty kicked in. So that's more where my headcanon goes, is that he wasn't one of the especially bloodthirsty members, but he was certainly in favor of the government backing the hell off. And frankly, given that he's a gay man in the 1970s and 80s, and a mutant, I don't doubt that he doesn't want a whole hell of a lot of a larger overseer trying to influence his life.
You know, it would be really interesting to see someone come back to this moment in Northstar's life and give us an alternate a universe where he continues on with some of that radicalization, shall we say, along the multi-vectors of his personality, and we get to watch Northstar become a radical queer terrorist through the 90s. He makes ACT UP look like a sewing circle, you know. So
just to put a little bit of a button on it,
yeah, because this is not a Canadian history podcast, but Tom, this is all great. Thank you. I really appreciate what you bring to this. You're a treasured friend.
The button is twofold. One, don't come at me if I got some of this a little bit off, because, again, this is not a Canadian history podcast. I think the broad strokes are fairly accurate, but, again, I fully acknowledge that I may have gotten a few things slightly wrong. But secondly, just to say, like, sovereigntist sentiment does still persist in Quebec, but it's much, much weaker at this stage.
Yeah, I remember hearing about a vote that they had, and then it kind of dropped off the radar after that vote failed.
So, like, in the early, 2010s, there was not even a referendum of sorts, but basically a poll, and it was around 40% of the population felt like there should be a little bit of a breakaway, but that's not That's not that high, honestly, to get anything really moving. But then on top of that, only 1 in 5 of the folks polled actually thought it would ever happen. So there might have been a desire for it, but like the willingness to make it happen wasn't exactly as strong. I don't really... I don't think it ever got as close, in recent history anyways, as Scottish independence got. Though, I mean, hell, Scottish independence is pretty much in the dustbin at this point, but...
I think all independence is pretty much in the dustbin, Tom.
Yeah, fuck. Anyway.
We're processing here, everybody. So to bring it back to that one little bit about Northstar's youth that we did get a hint of, back in his backstory in issue number 7, where he went to Parliament Hill to meet JMH for the first time, he said as he was walking in, "Until recently, I would never have walked into this building unless I had a bomb under my arm." So we got payoff for that little bit that Byrne seeded in there, because we didn't know why he would bomb the government. Now we know a little bit more about why.
I mean, at the time, I assumed it was just because he's a prick, but that's just...
At the time, I assumed it was because he was French. Or, excuse me, French-Canadian.
Also, I just want to acknowledge that was very fine effort on your part with the accent.
Thank you. I'm trying.
Yeah. So, back to the circus. Fisticuffs ensue, largely instigated by Aurora. Yes, Aurora, not Jean-Marie. Re-emerging post being smothered unconscious by Pearl. So I wonder if it's the getting knocked out that triggered the switch, or if it's the whole being buried in another woman's chest that caused Jean-Marie to check out.
You know, I didn't even write that stuff up because she's so muddled in this issue as to who's speaking. And since they introduced this idea of Aurora speaking with the French accent and Jean-Marie being able to access the powers, I'm wondering if this getting mixed up stuff, all this stuff seems to be happening since Walt's experiment. So I'm wondering if that's part of it, that whatever he did to her upset the balance that Jean-Marie and Aurora had, and things are getting weird.
Look, none of that is especially good for Aurora, Jean-Marie, what have you. That is such delightful karmic payback to Walt for fucking around the way he was for the reasons he was fucking around.
Well, he was trying to lock in his super slut and, missed the mark there, big guy.
I'm crying so many tears for Walter Langkowski.
Langkowski. So eventually the skeleton man throws a knife that goes off course. It buries itself in Pearl's chest, and while it doesn't kill her, the shock of thinking it would causes Pink Pearl to pass out.
So apparently she's a wilting violet.
I give you nothing. No.
Wilting violet.
Nope.
Anyway, lame. Like my joke. This whole fight was lame. The ending's lame. John Byrne, that was lame.
It's okay. I won't go as far as lame. I'm okay with less attention on the big fight and more on connected stories moving forward. The individual adventures don't really matter. It's what we learn about the characters and how they interact. That's what matters. Like we were talking about powers earlier, that it's not about, oh, look at this clever new way that somebody's using their power to get out of a jam. That's not what Alpha Flight does. Alpha Flight squabbles. It's great.
I'm sorry, are you saying that it's more about the friends we made along the way?
Yes, that's precise.
Okay.
Yes. Maybe the real Alpha Flight was the friends we made along the way. Was the friends that we fought and fucked along the way.
It was the warmth in our hearts.
All right, I'm going to make my big pitch here. So you got your time to rant and rave. It's now Chris's soapbox. So listen to me, Marvel.
Wait. This entire podcast is in Chris's soapbox?
No, this is our soapbox.
I built you a soapbox for you.
Oh, wow. So, Marvel, listen to me. Phase 1 of the new X-Men universe, you do an Alpha Flight workplace dramedy as a Disney Plus show. So it helps you to introduce the pieces you need for the movies, because the movies kind of have to move fast, but they have to have stuff set up. So if you have a TV show that can help to introduce things like Weapon X, and you can introduce whatever the hell you want through there. Just make it that workplace dramedy. You have Jared Kiso as JMH, and he dies at the end of season 1. You don't bring him back. You just let the whole Mac coming back drop. You lean into the living room meetings and the connective tissue, and you treat it like not the latest Tick live action show, but the first Tick live action show treated it, where you don't always see the big action happening. You see them walk away from the big action and have a silly little conversation in a coffee shop, and then go back to the big action that you don't show for budget reasons.
I bet you could shoot this for less than the reshoots on the new Captain America movie are costing.
Probably. Yeah, especially if you keep Sasquatch out of it for most of it.
Or it's just Walt mostly. When
Exactly,
it is when it is Sasquatch, it's a big orange blur, and all of a sudden there's just destruction everywhere.
And then when he comes back to being Walt, there's just a pile of twigs and sticks and bits that he couldn't wipe off his furry butt.
Yeah, but they're stuck across his crotch, so it's like always, it's almost like an Adam and Eve look at all times when he changes back, but you change up which kind of twigs it is. You gotta make sure you pay attention to the terroir, right? And like it's appropriate to where he was fighting.
So back on the page, Aurora, now completely in control of the body, once again breaks up with Northstar because she don't truck with no terrorists.
I just want to note that in the script, Chris has the body capitalized, and I think that's fairly appropriate under the circumstances.
You've got Aurora, you've got Jean-Marie, and you've got the body, and that's only one of them gets to drive the body at a time.
I mean, that's really all that Walt's interested in is the body.
No, he's interested in Aurora as Aurora.
Yeah.
But I don't think he'd be interested in Aurora if she didn't have the body, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. So in addition to Puck, we can now add Aurora to the list of narcs on Alpha Flight.
Man, Alpha Flight has a cool kids table, and Aurora and Puck are not at it. But unfortunately, Northstar is, which is why nobody else sits there.
Yeah, everyone else is just like out at recess.
So next up, we have the best guest appearance of Shaman ever. And I mentioned this before, and I'm so excited to get here. We have Iron Man number 195, cover date June 1985, titled The Thing Most Precious. Written by Denny O'Neil, penciled by Luke McDonnell, inked by Aiken and Garvey. That was Aiken and Garvey. Lettered by Rick Parker, boy. Colored by Bob Sharon. Edited by Mark Grunwald with Jim Shooter as editor-in-chief.
The cover is a large face split in half between the traditional Iron Man helmet and the human face of the man underneath, James Rhodes. A lot of big singular figure covers going on in the episode today.
Oh, not just today, but even Gilded Lily last episode. It seems to be Byrne's motif this year, you know?
Yeah, that's what he's feeling.
On the cover, Shaman is levitating crisscross applesauce and throwing energy from his hands as the caption box screams, "Can Shaman help James Rhodes find the cure?"
I need that with a little more gravitas.
Can Shaman help James Rhodes find the cure?
Thank you. So some context for the Iron Man books at this time. Rhodey is wearing the yellow and red Iron Man armor as Iron Man because his best buddy Tony Stark has been wrestling with a pretty bad drinking problem.
And friends don't let friends drive billion-dollar murder suits while drunk.
And Tony was the kind of drunk that couldn't operate the suit anyway, so someone had to.
And we don't mean here that Tony got drunk once and couldn't perform, so to speak. When we say Tony was the kind of drunk, we mean that as a character descriptor and not as an experience descriptor. Y'all get it? He even starts off this issue with a hobo beard to visually tell us how far he's fallen.
So Rhodey has been having headaches lately, and nothing and no one can help him. So now he's flown far to the north in search of any rumored help. And for our Shaman purposes, that's kind of all you need to know to get this thing moving.
One last thing before we dig in. When I first read Secret Wars 1, Rhodey is in the Iron Man armor for Secret Wars 1. It's a 12-issue limited series. And I didn't know that because he never takes his helmet off because none of the other superheroes know who Iron Man is underneath the armor. And so I didn't know that it was James Rhodes under there. I always thought it was Tony Stark. And I really wondered why Tony Stark was talking like he wanted to be Huggy Bear. Because James Rhodes always talks in the 80s like how a white guy thinks a black guy talks in 1985.
That's really disappointing.
It's jarring when you go into it thinking it in Secret Wars that's Tony Stark.
Quick question. Do you honestly think people these days know who Huggy Bear is?
Look, you've seen our demo numbers too, and based on listener age, I am quite confident that Huggy Bear is one of the more universally understood references we've dropped.
Iron Man is flying to the Starseed Reservation in Alberta, and we gave Alpha Flight and Wolverine shit for ignoring the border and potentially causing international incidents, so it's nice to see that everyone does it. Maybe we owe them an apology?
I will never apologize to Wolverine. He broke Mac's heart, and that is unforgivable, Tom. Bewildered look from Tom. Landing at the office of Dr. Michael Two Youngman, Iron Man walks in to find Shaman is expecting him.
When he asks if it was some magical force that alerted Shaman, Michael says that Hank Pym's secretary called ahead. And thus begins Shaman pulling the rug out from Rhodey at every single step.
And I am here for it. Oh, love it.
It begins with Shaman saying Rhodey has to take his helmet off. Rhodey, of course, refuses, but relents when Shaman goes to walk out of his own office, politely show him the door.
Yeah, I like to think that Shaman's just like, oh, you won't take it off? I'm just going to leave. Like, he doesn't explain anything. He just walks out of the building and then, like, powders himself somewhere. And Rhodey's like, what the fuck just happened? After a quick head touch, Shaman delivers his diagnosis. Quote, "It is not your body that is ill, it is your soul. This is as I expected." And Rhodey asks, anything you can do? And Shaman replies, me? No. But that does not mean the situation is hopeless. The soul, too, can be cured. Your choices are two. You may consult a psychiatrist. If you are lucky enough to find the right one, and you both persist for several years, you could be successful. End quote. That is a damn bleak description of mental health care, but it is also completely accurate.
When I read it in my head, the could and you could be successful was more of a could.
Yeah.
Like very like up note, like we'll see.
I don't hear Shaman with an upward vocal fry.
But I can hear it in that situation. But on the note of mental health care, finding a good counselor is like dating, but more expensive and with much higher stakes.
But hopefully less sex. I've seen that movie. Maybe that's our title for the episode.
Might be the title. Hey, listeners, we have a little bit of a process for coming up with the titles, and you're getting to listen to it on this one.
Yeah, we either have to cut out all of them or name it I've seen that movie.
Damn.
Where were we? So Rhodey says, you don't exactly fill me with confidence in the psychiatric profession. You mentioned another possibility. I am not going to try to talk like what a white guy thinks a black guy talks like in 1985.
Damn it. That's why I assigned you all those lines.
See, I was trying to get you to do it because I thought you would actually be able to be better about it.
I knew you were trying to get me to do it, and that's why I refuse. Michael replies, a far more certain and far, far more dangerous. You may visit the gorge. There, two events will occur. You will learn what is the thing most precious to you, and you will lose it.
I like the idea of him suddenly getting real cheery. You may visit the gorge. Da, 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 da. You get the Price is Right prize music.
And beautiful Calgary. Shaman makes preparations, throws some powder around them, and they are zapped into a seriously classic Doctor Strange comic-style weird world. When Rhodey asks, where are we? Michael replies, where I said we would be.
I love getting to see how Michael practices medicine. We usually see him after he does what he does, but this is our first time seeing how Shaman doles out the medicine man. Haha, medicine man pun.
God.
You didn't catch that in the script. Yay!
I didn't catch it in the script.
Oh, I can hear him talking like I can see Dr. Cox from Scrubs doing this, but like a more somber and serious Dr. Cox, where it's just like, yeah, I know all this stuff, but I'm not going to take the time to explain it all to you because why?
Shaman explains that whatever is going to happen here is dangerous, and since this is Rhodey's deal, only he can protect Shaman from what's going on. After flying to avoid a danger, Shaman insists they land and walk. Rhodey says, you don't believe in making things easy, do you?
Shaman replies, I do not make things any way at all. The essence of my power is not that I do. It is merely that I know.
I eat mushrooms and I know things.
Yeah, I guess you probably get less buy-in from people you're trying to help when you lead with, I eat mushrooms and I know things.
You know, but not in this day and age, you know.
So,
doing a lot of ketamine is how you get a cabinet position, it seems.
So Rhodey says, I'll have to take your word on that because I don't understand any of this. And Shaman comes back with, you have no need to understand. God, I love Shaman in this issue.
Understanding would be much more of the psychiatric route. And this is the faster and more effective and shortcut, but like, you don't need to know shit, man. Shaman just relentlessly drags Rhodey through his own damn mind and refuses to explain anything because Rhodey wouldn't understand anyway. I suspect this is a lot like what would have happened if Rhodey... No. This is not what would have happened if Rhodey had chosen the psychiatry route. Yes, they would have torn him apart, but they would have tried to explain it ever so slightly along the way.
And that's what would have made it take years, is trying to get Rhodey's dumb ass to understand it.
Do you want this? Do you want this done right, or do you want this done quick? And this is how it's happening.
Like, I can actually see Don Cheadle in this scene as Rhodey. Oh yeah, I totally buy that.
not nonstop shutting. Yeah.
I think that Shaman already knows. Look, there's a thing at the end here. You're going to figure out what's most important to you, and then you're going to lose it. I don't care what is most important to you. I don't care how you use it. I don't care what happens to you after this. You asked me a question. I told you the answer. Stop asking me more questions.
I'm here because I have to be here, not because I want to be here, and not because I can tell you anything. I'm simply here. Just can we? I got other patients. Can we keep this moving?
Yeah, I like. Okay, no, I'll do that once we get through the rest of the episode. Where were we? As Shaman seems to drift in and out of reality, Rhodey yells, "Come on, talk! Is any of this real?" And Shaman says, "I cannot give you a simple yes or no, because you and I probably do not agree on the meaning of the word real."
Oh, man. Ooh. This is 40 years ago and more true now than ever.
So Rhodey takes the spirit walk and realizes his identity as Iron Man is the most important thing to him. The Gorge strips him of his armor and Rhodey falls naked and blissful into self-acceptance, only to wake up back on a hill in Calgary. But wearing clothes, it would have been more fun if he woke up naked.
I've seen that movie. As soon as he recombobulates... I can't believe you wrote that word. As soon as he recombobulates himself, he asks Shaman if it was real and gets the answer, "Is that important?" So Rhodey's headaches are gone, and he's got some stuff to figure out, and he's got new headaches from his conversation with Shaman.
He probably goes back to the rest of the Avengers. He's like, "Yo, if they tell you to go that Canadian dude, he will fix your problem. But man, he's a number."
Be ready to have a good decade unpacking the experience with Doc Samson after this. Like I have booked 2 sessions a week for the next 3 years.
You know, if I had to choose between getting treated by Shaman or Doc Samson for mental health stuff, I would 100% choose Shaman. Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Because that's that good Canadian healthcare, man.
Yeah, it's not like Rhodey's paying this guy. I don't think Rhodey has any money. Like, he's just a dude who kind of stole the Iron Man armor from his friend.
This is also why he... Not only did he violate internationally drawn lines, he also, is stealing from the Canadian National Health Service in the process. This is why Quebec is right to break away.
They want to control their borders and keep those freeloading American superheroes out of their damn country, but all of it translated from the French, clearly. So technically, Shaman also appears in the next issue, Iron Man number 196, but it's just a couple of pages. It's the same credits, but drawn by Rich Buckler, where Rhodey essentially says, "Hey, yeah, man, about that armor, that mystic stuff, stripped off me, yeah, that isn't actually mine, and I really need to get it back to whose it is, because it's $1 billion murder suit and people notice."
Shaman informs him the Gorge will not be aligned with Earth again for many years, and thus return is impossible. To which Rhodey, upset, says, "You didn't tell me I could never return." And Shaman replies, "You didn't ask."
God, yes! Stick it to him, Shaman! Yeah! To be fair to Shaman, Rhodey was uniquely incurious about anything other than getting rid of his headaches. He told Shaman he wanted to fix his headaches. Shaman fixed his headaches. This sounds like a contract error on Rhodey's part.
So this is a fun little guest appearance for Michael, and this is how it wraps up. The rest of that issue deals with some of the after effects.
Yeah, the armor gets back to him. Yeah,
blah 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 blah. This may be a Canadian history podcast. This may be many things. It is absolutely not an Iron Man podcast.
Iron Man's a fascist.
Honestly, I would read a 12-issue miniseries about Dr. Michael Two young men treating superhero maladies just like this. Just absolutely taking the piss out of superheroes and getting the job done. Tonally, I feel like this is going to sound a lot like Dr. Katz.
Ooh.
But somehow far more effective than Dr. Katz ever is.
Okay, I'm throwing down with you about this. Dr. Katz is a deeper cut than Huggy Bear, Tom.
And yet somehow...
And with that... Why Not Read Alpha Flight is brought to you by the Excelsior Embroidery Company. Come check out the brand new Venture Brothers hats. They're going fast, and I'm not sure they'll be restocked before Christmas. So come grab yours before they sell out. See these and the 150 other items for sale, including comic book-themed patches, towels, and wall hangers, all at excelsiorembroidery.etsy.com. And I'm also listing up some Thanksgiving items because Tom's wife was kind enough to remind me that she went looking for them, and they weren't listed on Etsy. So thanks Thanksgiving will be up by the time you hear this, although this will be past Thanksgiving. Oh, fuck beans. I fucked it up, Tom.
That's fine. They'll be up for Canadian Thanksgiving, which we totally missed earlier in the year.
It won't be up for, it'll be up for next Canadian Thanksgiving. But
that's what I meant. Well, what else am I here for? Why Not is released every other week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at www. Why Not is released every other week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at www.thewhynotpod.com. And while you're there, maybe leave us a comment on the blog. We are also active on YouTube, Blue Sky, and somewhat on Reddit. I think we're walking away from Twitter. And as always, you can email us directly at whynotapod@gmail.com. That's whynotehpod@gmail.com.
Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis. It is produced and edited by Tom Flynn with background cat noises provided by Teeny.
Join us next time as we drop our first annual holiday special, which, you'll know what that looks like when we do. Kicking off the new year, we tackle a 2-issue arc where, since it's a multiple 12 and John Byrne is writing it, an Alphen will die.
See you then.